Hello everyone, it's Theme Park Avenue, I'm Eric. I've mentioned before that my favorite roller coaster manufacturer is Bolliger and Mabillard, or B&M. So today I will be ranking every B&M roller coaster I've ridden, just to show why I love this manufacturer so much. Before we begin this ranking, please subscribe to the channel so you know when new theme park content comes out. So for this ranking, I will be ranking 36 B&M roller coasters. And just so you know, I enjoy 34 of them, which shows just how great this manufacturer is. And this is based on just my experiences, and there are not a whole lot of international ones, and we'll just see where this goes. Starting from the bottom, number 36 is Green Lantern at Six Flags Great Adventure. This is definitely the worst B&M for me. It's a stand-up coaster, and I don't mind stand-up coasters as a whole, but this one is just quite rough. I thought it was not enjoyable at pretty much any moments, and while the layout is not that bad technically, there just aren't any elements I thought were enjoyable because of the bumpiness of the ride. So overall, it's definitely a one and done, and my least favorite B&M. Number 35 is Batman the Dark Knight at Six Flags New England. Perhaps a surprising one. I just thought this was a really bumpy one. I hear people say it's glass smooth. I thought it was like shattered glass because it was definitely the roughest floorless coaster. The layout is definitely among the weaker for floorless coasters, but it's not bad. But it was really just the bumpiness that made this a less enjoyable ride. Number 34, the first good one, is Scream. Scream is good, the layout is certainly decent, and some of the inversions and the first drop, I think they're enjoyable. The issues for this one are, it has rough patches, which are somewhat major at points, and the ride's pacing is probably the weakest of any B&M roller coaster. I think that kind of slowness of the ride means it's not as intense or whippy as other B&Ms, and it means that you are really seeing that parking lot setting as much as possible. So it's not a bad ride. I would still give it a 7 out of 10 probably, which shows just how good these rides all are. But it is definitely not my favorite. Number 33 is Georgia Scorcher, the Six Flags Over Georgia stand-up coaster. I used to think this was probably second worst, but now I think it's actually pretty good. The intensity of the ride is definitely something to make note of, and the ride is relatively smooth the whole way through. Its layout is small, and there's not a whole lot to it, but it is an overall enjoyable roller coaster. Number 32 is Rougarou, aptly named Rougarough by many. This ride's second half is quite bad. I think its elements are decent, but it's similar to Georgia Scorcher, except much bumpier. The first half, however, is fantastic. I think the first drop, loop, and dive loop are all just excellent, and I enjoyed that a lot, and I think that first half alone makes this a good ride. I know some hate it, some love it. I'm kinda in the middle, but it is a good ride overall. Number 31 is Vortex at Carowinds. This stand-up coaster gets a lot of hate. I thought it was perfectly smooth, and even though its layout is among the weakest, it's more fun than something like, say, Georgia Scorcher. So its smoothness and enjoyability, that's what makes it overall a very good ride. Number 30 is Batman the Ride at Six Flags Over Texas. This B&M invert is my least favorite of the model, and I enjoy the Batman the Ride clones overall, but this is the weakest clone. It's got its headbanging moments, much more than the others, and it's still not as intense. So overall, it is my least favorite, and I prefer the blue ones for sure. Number 29 is the Demon or Daemonen at Tivoli Gardens. This is one of the only international ones I've been on, and it is a solid floorless coaster. I think the first drop, its uniqueness, is something that stands out. The setting of this ride is beautiful and adds quite a bit, and the inversions are solid. It's overall just a good ride. It's pretty smooth and definitely an enjoyable one, and it would rank higher. It actually used to be in my top 50, but there are just so many other great B&Ms out there. Number 28 is Kraken at SeaWorld Orlando. I have not been on this one since repainting, so I don't know if that changes the ride at all, if they added theming, anything like that. But this is definitely a bit overhyped as a ride. It is a good floorless coaster, and as far as layouts go, it's probably the second best floorless layout. And the inversions are good, and the ride is intense, and I enjoy it, but it's definitely not smooth. And that's something that does kind of hold it back. I know the ultimate reason for a lot of these ranking lower is a lack of smoothness, but a ride does not have to be perfectly smooth, it's just that this one is far from that. It's got bumpy moments, and I think similar to Scream, it has a really ugly setting at some points, but its pacing is much better than Scream, so it ranks a lot higher, and this is still probably an 8 out of 10 ride, and that shows just how good these rides are. Number 27 is Riddler's Revenge at Six Flags Magic Mountain. This is the best stand-up coaster, and I've always called it Stand-Up Kumba because it has a fantastic layout, but it's definitely not consistent in its smoothness. I think the stand-up model is fine, but I think the roughness of this ride at points can actually be quite painful. So I definitely did want it to get like an aspirin or something after riding this last time, but I think it's still an excellent roller coaster for what it is, and the best stand-up coaster. And number 26 is Kumba. I was mentioning stand-up Kumba, and this is why it ranks somewhat low. Some call it the best B&M, and I can see why. It is intense, for sure, but it is not smooth, and because I've ridden this many, many times, probably dozens, it's just inconsistent. The worst rides on this, you don't want to go back on. The best rides on this wouldn't rank too much higher than where the ride ranks right now. It's a good ride for sure, but I just don't think it would rank a whole lot higher. Its best elements are great, and I think all the inversions are good, but I just think because the ride can be quite painful at points, that kind of holds it back from being higher, but even so, it probably wouldn't crack top 20 on its best days. Number 25 is Batman the Ride at Six Flags Great Adventure. This is a much better Batman clone, but it's not the best one. It's held back by just being not quite as intense as other two, but it is still relentless, and definitely an underrated invert overall. Number 24 is Dominator at King's Dominion, among the most underrated coasters I've ever ridden. This is very close in quality, honestly, to pretty much anything leading up to the top 10. There are just so many good B&Ms that had to rank somewhat low. This used to be in my top 25, and I'm sad to rank it here right now, but I do love this ride. It's pretty much perfect as far as floorless coasters go. You have the smoothness, the intensity, the great layout, the pacing. It's the longest floorless. There's nothing wrong with it. I can't fault the ride, I love the ride, and it's definitely a favorite at King's Dominion. Definitely one of the best. Do I do have to get on Twisted Timbers at some point? Number 23, Medusa at Six Flags Discovery Kingdom. I have yet to ride Great Adventures floorless, but I'm sure it will rank around here. But Medusa is definitely my favorite floorless coaster, and honestly, it's pretty much the epitome of good looping coasters. It's a sit-down, floorless. You have a great first drop, inversions, almost perfectly smooth. It's got moments where you'll slightly tap your head against the shoulder rest, but it's not bad. And I think the pacing of this ride is relentless, and there's nothing wrong with the ride. It's fantastic, and as far as floorless coasters go, it is the best. There's not too much else to say about this kind of thing, but it just shows that even a bunch of inversions put together in a layout can be just as good as some of today's modern, whippy, crazy elements that we get from Mach and Intamin. Number 22 is Batman the Ride at Six Flags Magic Mountain. This is very intense. I think it's a fantastic invert, and honestly, people do fault it for being a clone, but it doesn't feel like some of the other clones, so it definitely gets a pretty high ranking. Number 21 is Batman the Ride at Six Flags Over Georgia. This one barely ranks above, as I do think it is a bit more intense, as most do. But I don't think it's quite as big a gap as some say between Magic Mountain and Over Georgia, but it is definitely a very good ride, and certainly an excellent invert. Number 20 is Superman Ultimate Flight at Six Flags Great Adventure. Many don't like these flying coasters, and I don't quite see why. I am a sucker for the models, I just think it's a cool sensation, and the pretzel loop and twist are just unbelievable elements. The one thing holding this one back, of course, is that it's mostly gliding through turns and it's not super forceful besides the inversions. And maybe one more inversion and one less turn could do a lot of good for these rides. But I do like the mix of the graceful, smooth feelings and the intense, fast-paced feelings. And honestly, I just think these flying coasters, especially Superman Ultimate Flight, is underrated. Number 19 is Superman Ultimate Flight at Six Flags Over Georgia. This one definitely ranks higher for being in a much better setting. You have some sort of near-miss elements and tunnels that you just don't get with the Great Adventure one. And I think it's fantastic the way they worked it into the setting. The fact that you can go by underneath the ride at certain points is just cool as you're walking through the queue. So this definitely earned a pretty high ranking on the list, and is certainly underrated. Number 18 is Afterburn at Carowinds. This invert is intense for sure, and it's above the Batman clones. Not by a huge margin though. Its layout is honestly right around the same level, but it is a bit more intense in my opinion, I think it's a bit better, but there's not a whole lot else to say about it because I haven't been on it in a little while, but it is certainly good. Number 17 is Valraven. This may surprise some, but I think dive coasters are underrated. This one particularly is good. I know that mid-course brake run does kill it a little bit, but with the first drop and all of the inversions, and even the airtime hill, there's nothing I dislike about this ride apart from that brake run. And the ride is just enjoyable. It may not be as relentless as a lot of the roller coasters I just named, but it's just as fun, and actually more fun than those. Number 16 is SheiKra. This one gets a slight edge because I realize that the lack of the harsh mid-course brake run adds quite a bit. And the ride is just as, if not more intense than Valraven. And I think even though it doesn't have quite as many elements, it's enjoyable, and it's one I always have to ride when I go to Busch Gardens Tampa. Number 15 is Hulk, or the Incredible Hulk, or whatever the official name is, at Islands of Adventure. This ride is fantastic. It is kind of rough sometimes, I'll admit that, but it is just so good. The launch out of the tunnel is something you don't get on any other B&M. And you have so many good inversions, a great setting, onboard audio that adds quite a bit, and it's just an unbelievable, exhilarating, and fun experience, and definitely one of my favorite rides at Universal Orlando Resort, and one of my favorite rides in all of Florida. Number 14 is Nitro. This is my least favorite B&M Hyper, but it ranks at number 14, which shows just how much I enjoy that model. I like floater airtime a lot, and this one delivers. The only thing kind of holding it back is that I think it's hard to distinguish from the other Hyper coasters because there wasn't really a standout element I thought, wow, this is a fantastic ride. But it is a fantastic ride, which is why it still gets a pretty good ranking. Number 13 is Intimidator at Carowinds. This one has insane floater hills. I didn't have any trims when I last rode it, I'm pretty sure, and if I did, they were just really hard to notice. And I enjoyed the ride quite a bit. It has its intense moments, but what really holds it up is the fantastic floater airtime, and it definitely gets a pretty high ranking here. Number 12 is Raptor at Cedar Point. This is way more intense than the other inverts I've mentioned so far. That final helix is insane, and I like everything about this ride. There's sometimes bumpiness, but my best rides are perfectly smooth the whole way through while also being horrifyingly intense. And the fact that this ranks at number 12 shows just how good B&M inverts and B&Ms as a whole really can be. Number 11 is Gatekeeper, also at Cedar Point. I know a lot of people don't like this one that much, but it's just perfect for me. The first drop is something I haven't really experienced on a whole lot of others. The way it is, it's cool. And you have intensity all the way through for me. The one airtime hill I actually thought really did its job well, and every inversion is fun, and the perfect smoothness gives a special gliding feeling I haven't gotten on any other roller coaster, because I haven't ridden any wing coasters yet besides Gatekeeper. And if all wing coasters are this good, I'm really excited to ride more. I love the near miss elements, I love the drop, I love all the inversions, it's just an excellent ride. Number 10 is Manta at SeaWorld Orlando. Flying coasters I mentioned before are great, and this one is certainly among the best. You have the awesome dip over the water, iconic, and apart from that you have intense elements. All the inversions hit home runs here, and it's just a perfect flying coaster. But it doesn't quite rank as the best flying coaster, and I'll get to that later. Number 9 is Montu at Busch Gardens Tampa. This invert is relentless, with probably the best layout of them all except for one other. The intensity I think is the best of all the inverts, and the way it works around terrain is definitely special. The first loop, and the Batwing especially, these elements stand out. The pacing's relentless, and it's definitely a near-perfect ride. Number 8 is Banshee at Kings Island. This invert is underrated for me. I think it's the best one, even though it is a little more focused on being large elements that you glide through than being a relentless, intense ride. I like that. That's kind of why the dive coasters and wing coasters rank so high for me. I just enjoy that kind of ride. And Banshee's layout is phenomenal. You have that sort of pretzel loop on Banshee that's definitely amazing. And every other element on this ride is spectacular, and I think Banshee is the best invert and among the best rides at Kings Island. Number 7 is Tatsu. Tatsu is just perfection. The terrain, the way they work that in, is fantastic. You slowly go over certain parts with a graceful feeling, but then you also have the pretzel loop. And this perfect mix of graceful elements and relentless, intense elements is just something that only Tatsu is able to master. And I think that really stands out. The pretzel loop is definitely the highlight, but every other inversion on here is good. The first drop is good. I love flying coasters. It's a long ride. There's nothing I can fault the ride for, and it still ranks at number 7. Number 6 is Behemoth at Canada's Wonderland. This is a ride with a first drop that terrifies me. This first drop is one of the best. All the airtime hills following are good, and the only thing somewhat holding this back is that you do kind of slow down before that helix a bit too much, but that helix really does its job. The ride feels long, and even though it is an out and back and seems simple, it's quite intense, and it's quite an awesome ride. Number 5 is Goliath at Six Flags Over Georgia. This is just perfect. I mentioned that for Tatsu, and this one is also perfect, because you have a first drop that's on par with Behemoth. You have flawless airtime hills. You have a helix that does not slow down as much as Behemoth's, and then you have some more camelbacks at the end. The ride is long, and the ride is massive, and I love B&M hypercoasters, and this one is certainly among the best. Number 4 is Mako at SeaWorld Orlando. Many call this the best B&M hyper, and I see why, though not enough people talk about that second half. Obviously, you have great 5-second floater hill, and I love that on Mako, and I love the first drop and all that, but the second half has a sort of whippiness to it that only Mako has as far as B&M hypers go. I think it really flies through that part, and it's very visually interesting to be on it as you go over the water sort of at the end. And the ride feels long, and that second half really is what stands out, where you have intensity to add to the excellent airtime that precedes it, and it's just definitely one of the best B&M coasters. Number 3 is Diamondback at Kings Island. The first drop's great, the airtime is fantastic. This is probably my favorite of the hyper coasters just because it's so much fun. I enjoy the water splash a lot. I think the pacing on this one is the best of them, and though I haven't been on Diamondback in a while, it remains my favorite B&M hyper, and it's just one I enjoy a lot, and I don't know what else to say about it, but it definitely earned its top 3 spot. Number 2 is Leviathan at Canada's Wonderland. Yes, this Giga I know some would not put very high, but I think it's underrated. It is among the best roller coasters in the world for me because its airtime trumps every other roller coaster I've named so far. I think the first drop feels that 300 feet. It's definitely a Giga coaster. The only thing I can knock the ride for is that its length is not amazing for a Giga coaster, but I think every element on this ride is fantastic, and I love the ride, and it's definitely among the best roller coasters I've ridden, and definitely the second best B&M. But number 1 is Fury 325 at Carowinds. I don't think this is a surprise to anyone, but it is just a flawless roller coaster. I guess there are other roller coasters I like more than it, but this is a flawless roller coaster. It's smooth, it's intense, it has airtime, it has unique elements, it has great traditional elements, first drop's good, speed, height, everything about it. There's nothing to fault Fury for, and apart from that, you have also like the best paint job of pretty much any roller coaster. So Fury, we've talked about it before, we all know it's great, and it is the best B&M roller coaster I've ridden. Thank you for watching. I hope this kind of showed that this is a great manufacturer. They have so many excellent roller coasters, and some of them definitely deserve a little more praise than I think they get. Subscribe to the channel for more content, and like the video if you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time.